Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is our Cisco Cloud Fundamentals series for exam 210451. And we are talking about cloud deployment models, and we're going to take a look at the private cloud. And here he is, back with us again, Mr. Ronnie Wong. How are you?
Well, Vaughn, thank you for asking. I am doing well as we continue in our series today. Temperature has dropped outside in Florida just a tad bit, so a little bit colder in the studio, which is nice because yesterday we didn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
But overall, though, it is nicer today, and it now means we are ready to take a look at our second cloud deployment
Because
model
it's cold
as well.
outside.
Because it's cold.
That
Right.
means it's ready to go
That's
for
right.
the private cloud.
You better believe it, because it means
making
that,
connections.
Absolutely. Okay. It means that we can be warm and nice right here in the studios as well. So that's what's happening. You can see I'm wearing long sleeves too. So yep, I am, because it's cold for me. Now, as we get started, remember that there's 4 different deployment models. We've already just taken a look at the idea here of the public cloud, right, Vaughn?
Mm-hmm.
Where we talked about a lot of different things. Let me go back over here. Okay, we talked about the scope of our public cloud and risk and challenges essentially associated. We went over quite a few different things here, made sure that we understood that. But now as we go back in, we want to take a look at the idea of the private cloud. Remember that this particular definition comes from the NIST SP 800-145. Trying to make sure that we can get the whole thing on the screen here. And we're taking a look at this one right here, okay? So when we start to talk about this, okay, how in the world is the deployment model actually going to be structured in terms of private cloud versus the idea of the public cloud? Well, remember that for us, the public cloud, it is essentially open for use by the general public, as you see in the third definition down there. In this one, notice the cloud infrastructure provision for, this time, Vaughn, exclusive use for a single organization comprised of multiple consumers if needed, okay? Now, they talk about it as an example of a business unit. In other words, a tenant, if we actually want to, okay? So in this particular instance, when we talk about the idea of a private cloud, it's really about this, okay? Single use by, or exclusive use by a single organization is really the key here. Now, when we start to try and actually understand this, okay? So if there is a public cloud that's out there, why is there necessarily a need for a private cloud is one of those questions that we do have to think about as well, okay? So when we compare this to the idea of the public cloud, okay, the private cloud itself gives us this ability to do a couple of things, okay? One is I don't have to worry about a lot of the concerns of the public cloud that we've talked about before, right? The idea of the security risk, the cost risk behind it, as well as some of the control risks that we face. Essentially, the private cloud itself actually means that I handle pretty much all of it if I need to. Now, the unusual thing about this particular model, though, Vaughn, especially in today's networks, it is kind of something that's kind of continued to grow and develop, where we can have a complete hosted private cloud inside of the public cloud. Okay, that's the weirdest one that, yeah. So in other words, you can get access to something like AWS, but then you can set up your own private cloud inside of AWS if you wanted to, okay? So that all your company can actually have access to that particular portion of that instance and everything that you need. And it can even be so exclusive that you can do what we call a bare metal cloud instead that says, I want complete 100% dedicated access to servers so that only your virtual machines, only your network, only your applications, that they're not pulled together with everybody else in that model, but they're all dedicated to you.
This is kind of reminding me of like the intranet versus the internet,
Right.
and where it's all just for your particular organization. Nobody from the outside can kind of get in. That's what I'm thinking of or remembering.
I think that's actually a great analogy towards the way that we used to do things, where we might set up a web server, but it's only available for inside of my company and not available for general public use out there. Files and resources that I have access to as long as I'm inside of my company network, but it's not available again for other networks to be able to gain access to. Yep.
And that's that same idea of like you have the public cloud, but we just have our own little portion here that's private that you're still not able to get into unless you're within that private area.
Right. So let's take a look at my graphical representation of this. Okay. So there's two different ways that we can actually take a look at the idea of building a private cloud from one organization. Now, I have a company here at the bottom because I like the word company better than organization, but it can be organization if you really want to. Okay. We have the cloud provider that we can gain access to. Usually you'll have to pay for that. And the idea of private clouds are generally more expensive because you're not sharing resources, right? You're actually paying for them to say, yes, you have exclusive use of our equipment this way. We're not actually sharing this with anybody to help divide the load. You're paying for the whole thing. Okay.
It's kind of like buying VIP tickets.
It is.
Right?
It's,
Yes.
yeah.
You
very
get your
good.
own box. You get the box seats, but you're gonna pay for that.
Okay. Now, Vaughn, I'll just have to agree with you vicariously because I've never had box seats anywhere. So I'm going to say, Vaughn, you probably have.
Oh no, I've only gotten them comped by other people,
Oh,
but
okay,
I've
okay.
never purchased
I was
them
gonna say,
myself.
man, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll have to do it vicariously. Yes, I'll agree with you, Vaughn. And that's how it works. But yeah, I've never actually gotten into a private seat that way. But it's the same idea. Yeah, that
It's
you
kinda
have the
fun.
exclusive lease here. Okay. Now, the other way that we traditionally have done this instead is what I have towards the bottom, where you actually say, "Hey, I'm going to build my own data center." So instead of relying on the cloud provider, you can build this all on your own, okay, on your on-prem data center if you choose to. And that's probably the easiest way to get exclusive access to ensure, okay, that you don't have to worry about anybody else inside of that public cloud being able to get access to your little private cloud inside of some particular cloud provider that's out there. Okay. Now, within the public cloud, though, you can create this in a few different ways. So, for example, in Amazon Web Services, we took a look earlier where we could actually set up what we called a VPC, a virtual private cloud. Okay. And that allows us to actually be able to do that. Now, we're not setting that up today. Okay. But you do have that ability to essentially do that where you are isolating anybody on your network from any of the other particular customer tenants, and you get your own entire private IP address range and network segmentation, you name it, it all belongs to your one company to do so. In the realm of Cisco, they have a particular product that's called Cisco One Enterprise Cloud Stack. Okay, Cisco One Enterprise Cloud Stack. We're going to kind of briefly go over that a little bit later on. We're not really worried about it right now, but just realize Cisco has their own product for being able to help you develop this entire private cloud data as well. And you even go to VMware because Cisco and VMware kind of worked hand in hand on their cloud technologies to help them actually set up everything. VMware's vCloud Suite is also another possibility that you might see. Okay, and that helps them work out, of course, the providers inside of the actual cloud network as well as not. Okay, now when we start to then talk about this particular idea of setting this up, well, what are the benefits that we have, and then what are some of the risks and challenges that we have in doing something like this as well? So these are again the considerations. Notice, once again, we're not talking about the underlying technologies, about the number of servers or capacity or network, things that we actually can do here. It all is about how do we choose to do this. Private cloud normally is something that we really have to do if our organization requires it. And some organizations absolutely 100% will require something like this. If you're trying to say, hey, look, what's really important is that none of my data ever gets exposed outside of my company, then running something like a private cloud is the way to do this. Even if you are actually part of a public cloud that's out there, but you want to make sure that you actually set up your own virtual private cloud network to be able to do so if you choose to do this. Okay, but the idea of the data center is probably the one that's the biggest challenge here as we begin to take a look. So let's go ahead and talk about it in the same way here. If I can get a text box going, that's exactly what I want to do. And that will help us out. Okay. So let's take a look. Risks and challenges. Okay. Now, when it comes down to the actual risk and challenges, believe it or not, the risk essentially kind of goes away in terms of security challenges. But I say that, but it's only to a certain point. And the reason why is that when we start talking about the idea of security challenges, that means that you have to make sure that someone, if you're actually providing this, okay, is actually responsible. Excuse me. Security challenges. What? I kind of deleted something and it's not coming back. There we go. Security challenges are the responsibility of the customer. All right, so Vaughn, that doesn't sound bad. If I feel confident that I can handle those particular security challenges that we talked about, data loss prevention, all the other things that we had mentioned here, the cost, the sprawl, the very fact that administrative control may get a little bit out of hand. If I can handle that, that's great. Okay, but Vaughn, what if I go, I don't know what the actual challenges are in terms of security? Okay, and now I'm responsible for managing the security, the secure connection between the cloud and my company. Well, Vaughn, all of a sudden the challenge seems a little bit higher, right?
You're gonna need to know what you're doing
Right.
if you're going with private clouds. Like, you need to have like the knowledge, the experience, and know what you're doing.
Yeah, you absolutely have to be able to do that. Okay, so even though it essentially avoids some of the risks that we had with the public cloud, right? Where we talked about all those different things in the public cloud, and if you're saying, Ronnie, review those, I'm going to say, go back and watch the episode because I need you to actually watch those, make sure you get them in hand. But just kind of realize that this is one of the things here, is that it becomes a responsibility of the customer. So once you actually set that up, that means you're responsible for making sure that all of the connections are secured the way that you need them to be. And if you're actually also having to follow regulation and compliance rules to make sure that happens, the private cloud provider is not going to say, yeah, we'll set all that up for you. You're actually responsible for that as well because it is your cloud that you're actually providing for, okay? Now, the great thing is control challenges, okay, once again, are also responsibility of the customer, okay? So I should say risks, not challenges here. That's what I should have said, okay? Now, you're noticing a theme here, Vaughn, as far as what I'm actually typing in. Look, the responsibility now rests where? Solely on the customer itself when it comes down to the private cloud. So now the control risk, well, what are the possible control risks? Once again, you have to be willing to manage the access to the control here, and you have to be able to manage the server sprawl. You have to be able to actually do all that on your own. You have to keep very good watch over all these things that we have to talk about as well, okay? Now, once we start doing that, then we actually have another risk that we have to talk about too.
What about cost? Is this going to be less? I don't know. To me,
Yeah.
well, you go back to like the VIP tickets and everything. Those are, you have to pay more for it, but then you're also needing to be responsible for all of the security and all the challenges. Like, I mean, obviously, I know that there's upsides to all of this, but if it costs more and everything's on you,
Yeah.
it's all on you.
Right. And so that's where you have to weigh that out. Like, so is the private cloud really something that my company can handle to do? If it's something that's required of me, what does that mean in terms of security challenge, right? It means I have to get somebody on staff that understands how to get this done. If I need somebody that actually helps me to make sure that we go into compliance, right? I make sure that I actually follow those compliance rules. If I don't know what those compliance rules are, again, I have to get somebody that helps me to do that, okay? Same thing with administration of cloud environments too. You don't know how to do it, you have to get somebody to do it.
But I guess the flip side of this could be a benefit or a plus. You have complete control over this.
Yes.
Yes.
You do have complete control over what goes in there and everything else that happens. But Vaughn, this is the only one that's really shared in terms of the public cloud and private cloud, because regardless, right? If you get access to the infrastructure itself, okay, notice that I should put here, the cost risk are also the responsibility of the customer. Well, it's always been that way. Even in the public, you're actually responsible for the cost that you end up using. So this is the one that's really shared by far. Now, the differences though here, okay, is when we actually get to this point, the risks are a little bit more upfront. So unlike the public cloud that gives you the ability to pay as you go a lot of times, private cloud, depending on how you set this up, okay, it might not be. So for example, let's say we go with the on-prem data center. That means you're forking out the cost for that right away. So CapEx, right, the capital expenditures that we have, okay, can actually be higher. Okay, and the reason why is even with the public cloud provider, what if we don't know any of those challenges and risks that we talked about? It means we have to hire more people to help us out, and that means CapEx is a big part of that, is getting that actually started the way that we need to, okay? Now, the other thing is, remember that for us here, okay, usually in the public cloud, okay, the security itself is, again, up there and, with the cloud provider to make sure that we're isolated from the other ones. But this time, though, in the private cloud, it is our responsibility, again, to keep isolation. So the great thing is, as far as cost goes, okay, isolation does cost. And this is another one, too. So do you have the time and the ability to make sure that you can manage all of the costs to ensure that you're isolated the way that you need to? Going back to the idea scale of the actual security once again. And lastly, unlike the public cloud where we can scale a lot better and a lot faster, scalability, depending on the provider itself, may be limited. That means even if you come to this point with whoever your private cloud provider might be, it might not be the biggest companies out there, but usually most people pick those because they tend to have more resources. If you pick a smaller company, Vaughn, what if you come to this point where you're saying, all right, I need 6 or 7 more servers to be able to run this, and go, yeah, we only have 3. Well, now what do you do when you have something like that if you're going to do that? And even in a data center, right? Again, more cost begins to come out on your end, or you're actually going to be moving your particular cloud to some other private cloud provider that has more, scalable resources for you, and that again is going to cost even more. Okay, so all of these particular challenges that we would have faced in the public cloud, they kind of get not. I don't want to say that they disappear. Okay, but they get deflected back toward the customer when the public cloud says, "Oh yeah, we'll handle the isolation. We'll handle all these things." There's still a few challenges that you have to make. You have to kind of realize it's out there. But overall, though, the responsibility is here. Now, you can always make the philosophical argument, Vaughn, that even the public cloud, the security risks are always responsibility of the customer. Okay, the control challenges are always responsibility of the customer. The costs are always responsibility of the customer. You can make that philosophical challenge, okay, if you want to. But in the end of it, right, if I actually have a public cloud provider, they're the ones that say that they can do it, okay, that they can actually handle, like, making sure that your particular data is not going to get intermingled with somebody else. They're the ones that give you that control, okay? They give you the interface on how to actually control that and how you can actually make this more secure. They actually tell you exactly what the costs are going to be. On your particular end, as far as a private cloud goes, it can cost you a lot more because you don't know how much everything's actually going to end up being a lot of times until you're done.
It's like you have to make like a pros and cons list for your particular needs. Like which one's going to give me, you talk about the biggest bang for the buck, or whatever is going to work for our organization. And you said some might require, whatever industry or customers you serve, you might have to have this in a private area rather than in a public sphere. So you just have to kind of pick and choose, and to each his own, tomato. Everybody has reasons of why you want to use one versus the other.
Yeah, and just for your own, I don't want to call it irrational paranoia, and I mean that. It's not irrational, right? If you really say, hey, look, I'm really not comfortable with putting my stuff in the public cloud, okay, and it really makes me nervous, you go for the private cloud, even if it is more expensive, because it makes you feel more secure, right? It gives you that ability to say, no, I know at least the controls that I have, and I'm not worried about my data, doing. But that means you also have to have the expertise to do it. So the private cloud can be more costly up front, okay? But just kind of realize that that's one of the deployment models that you'll actually end up seeing, okay? All right, so Vaughn, this episode just a little bit shorter than our previous episode, but we do have a couple of more deployment models that we need to make sure that we get through as well. So Vaughn, this is a great place for us to stop and then make sure we pick up on the last 2 deployment models that we have, and then that'll get us ready to actually proceed on to some other deeper topics too.
All right, well, you heard the man. It is time to skedaddle. So let's go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.